What if the biggest threat to Aunt Lydia isn't June? What if it isn't Mayday? What if it isn't even the commanders? What if the person who ultimately brings Aunt Lydia's carefully constructed plans crashing down is someone who's been standing beside her all along? I'm talking about Aunt Vidala. Throughout Season 1 of the Testaments, Aunt Vidala often comes across as a loyal servant of Gilead. She follows the rules, enforces discipline, and rarely questions authority in public. Compared to Aunt Lydia, who occasionally shows moments of compassion or hesitation, Vidala seems completely devoted to the system. But that's exactly what makes her so dangerous. The people who openly oppose you are easy to identify. The people who smile, nod, and quietly collect information are much harder to predict. And when you look closely at the season, there are several moments that suggest Aunt Vidala may become Aunt Lydia's greatest obstacle in Season 2. Today, let's break down why Aunt Vidala could betray Aunt Lydia, how that betrayal might unfold, and why it could completely change the future of Ardua Hall. From the beginning of the series, Ardua Hall has never been a peaceful place. On the surface, it appears organized and disciplined. The ants work together, the students follow strict routines, and everyone seems united under the same purpose. But underneath that order lies constant competition. Every ant wants influence. Every ant wants respect. Every ant wants to prove that her methods are the best way to preserve Gilead. That creates tension, even when nobody says it out loud. And Aunt Vidala has always seemed like someone who believes rules should never be questioned. That's one of the biggest differences between her and Aunt Lydia. Aunt Lydia believes the system can still be guided. She bends certain rules when she believes it serves a larger purpose. She quietly observes people instead of immediately punishing them. Sometimes she even protects students without openly admitting it. Vidala doesn't seem interested in that kind of flexibility. To her, the rules are the rules. Mercy creates weakness. Compassion creates rebellion. And once you start making exceptions, you risk losing control altogether. That difference may not seem important at first, but over time, it becomes a serious ideological conflict. Imagine two people trying to protect the same institution. One believes survival requires adaptation. The other believes survival requires absolute obedience. Eventually, those two philosophies collide. Season 1 already hints that Lydia is becoming more willing to make difficult compromises behind the scenes. Vidala, on the other hand, appears increasingly suspicious whenever events don't follow the official line. One scene that stands out is how Vidala reacts whenever students begin questioning authority. She isn't interested in understanding why they're struggling. She immediately assumes disobedience. That mindset makes her effective at enforcing discipline, but it also makes her likely to suspect anyone behaving differently, including Aunt Lydia herself. Now let's think about Lydia's position. By the end of Season 1, she's carrying enormous secrets. She knows far more than most people realize. She has seen corruption inside Gilead. She understands that certain commanders abuse their power. She also recognizes that protecting the girls sometimes requires working outside official procedures. The more secrets Lydia keeps, the greater the chance someone notices. And Aunt Vidala is exactly the type of person who notices changes. Here's where the theory gets interesting. What if Vidala begins investigating Lydia? Not because she hates her, but because she genuinely believes Lydia has become compromised. From Vidala's perspective, even bending one rule could threaten the entire foundation of Gilead. That would justify watching Lydia more closely, listening to conversations, questioning unusual decisions, reporting suspicious behavior. We've already seen that Ardua Hall isn't built on trust. It's built on observation. Everyone watches everyone else. Students are expected to report one another. Ants monitor the students. Commanders monitor the ants. The eyes monitor everyone. Why would Aunt Lydia be any different? If anyone starts paying attention to her unusual decisions, Vidala feels like the most likely candidate. Another reason this theory makes sense is because of personality. Vidala doesn't appear emotional. She isn't impulsive. She rarely loses her temper. Instead, she projects certainty. Those qualities make her incredibly dangerous in a political environment. She doesn't need dramatic confrontations. She simply waits for evidence. And once she believes she has proof, she'll likely act without hesitation. Now, think about Daisy. Daisy's undercover mission depends on remaining unnoticed. But every time she succeeds, she increases the chances that someone starts asking difficult questions. How has this Pearl girl avoided suspicion? Why does she behave differently? Why do unusual events keep occurring around her? If Lydia quietly protects Daisy in subtle ways, Vidala could eventually notice the pattern. Not because Daisy makes a mistake, because Lydia does. The same applies to Agnes. Agnes slowly transforms throughout Season 1. She begins questioning Gilead. She becomes emotionally conflicted. She starts making decisions that don't perfectly fit the expectations placed upon her. Lydia often responds with patience. Vidala likely would not. To someone like Vidala, hesitation itself becomes suspicious. Another clue lies in how authority works inside Ardua Hall. Although Lydia appears to lead the institution, leadership in Gilead is rarely absolute. Every powerful figure answers to someone else. That means Vidala doesn't necessarily need to defeat Lydia herself. She only needs enough evidence to convince the commanders that Lydia has become unreliable. Once that happens, Lydia's influence could disappear almost overnight. This wouldn't even require Vidala to lie. Imagine Lydia secretly withholding information, meeting someone privately, making an unauthorized decision, destroying evidence, helping a student. Taken individually, those actions might seem harmless. Together, they could create the appearance of treason. Vidala wouldn't have to invent a conspiracy. She'd simply present the facts in the worst possible light. There's another possibility that makes this theory even more compelling. What if Vidala honestly believes she's saving Gilead? The best television villains rarely see themselves as villains. They think they're protecting something important. If Vidala believes Lydia has become weak, then exposing her becomes an act of loyalty rather than betrayal. That makes the conflict much more interesting. Neither woman sees herself as the enemy. They're simply trying to preserve completely different versions of Gilead. Another reason I think this theory has potential is timing. Season 2 will likely raise the stakes dramatically. The resistance will grow. The pressure on Gilead's leadership will increase. Mistakes will become more costly. That's exactly the kind of environment where internal divisions become dangerous. History shows that authoritarian governments often struggle more with internal power struggles than external enemies. Distrust spreads. People begin protecting themselves. Alliances shift. Vidala betraying Lydia would fit naturally into that kind of story. There's also Commander Judd. If Judd begins questioning Lydia's decisions, who will be the most obvious person to provide information? Vidala. She's respected. She's disciplined. She's seen as dependable. Her testimony would carry enormous weight. That could make her one of the most influential witnesses against Lydia if an investigation ever begins. Ironically, Vidala's greatest strength may become her biggest weakness. She believes absolute obedience creates stability. But absolute obedience often prevents people from recognizing corruption. If Lydia starts breaking rules to stop greater injustices, Vidala may interpret those actions as betrayal rather than sacrifice. That misunderstanding could push Ardua Hall into crisis. Imagine the consequences. Lydia loses authority. The students lose the one aunt willing to quietly protect them. The commanders gain tighter control. Fear increases. The resistance loses one of its most valuable inside allies. That single betrayal could completely reshape Season 2. Of course, there's another possibility. What if Vidala succeeds temporarily? Perhaps Lydia is removed from power. Perhaps Ardua Hall becomes harsher than ever. Perhaps the girls believe hope is gone. Only later does Vidala discover that the commanders never truly valued her loyalty either. Gilead has a history of discarding useful people once they've served their purpose. If that happens, Vidala could become another victim of the very system she spent her life defending. That's what makes this theory so fascinating. It isn't simply about good versus evil. It's about different beliefs colliding inside the same institution. Lydia has begun seeing the cracks in Gilead. Vidala still believes those cracks can be repaired by enforcing stricter discipline. Eventually, one of them has to be proven wrong. If Season 2 continues exploring internal conflict within Gilead, don't be surprised if Aunt Vidala becomes far more important than many viewers expect. She doesn't need to become the show's biggest villain. She only needs to make one decision, one report, one accusation, one conversation with the wrong commander. That could be enough to destroy everything Aunt Lydia has spent years quietly building. And if that happens, Ardua Hall may never recover. So here's the question. Do you think Aunt Vidala will remain loyal to Aunt Lydia, or will she ultimately choose Gilead over the woman who helped build Ardua Hall? Let me know your theory in the comments. I have a feeling this rivalry is only just beginning.